Here we go on HQ. I'm Chris Hassel with Jacqueline D'Agostino, Brady Quinn, and hey, Pete Prisco is here with his homework. We asked him, we told him to rank the top 100 potential free agents this season. And Pete, we look back a few years ago, you used to only do 50.
Yeah.
Now it's 100.
I know. It's expanded. And why?
No, it's great.
More work.
It's awesome. It's more work.
Fun to do. It's fun to do.
Yeah.
Quite the undertaking. You're doing like praying hands there.
Well, that's what he always does when he sits over there in his little goofy ways.
What are you talking about?
Okay, so
Look who's front and center, Pete.
Kirk Cousins.
Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
Because he comes up as #1 on the list, Pete. We've been talking about this because the negotiating window for free agents opens in about 3-ish weeks on March 11th. So we're going to go down the list, 1 all the way to 100, and #1.
Wait, we're going to go all the way through 100?
I'm just going to mention 100 because I think it's kind of funny. That's
We have to mention
a deep tease.
And 100 was done for one guy and one guy only.
And we'll talk about that. But first, let's talk about #1. 1 and 100, both quarterbacks. There you go, a little tease there. But Kirk Cousins is #1. And Pete, how much of a priority should it be for Minnesota to keep Kirk Cousins there?
Let me start by saying this, though, okay? Because I think we know it's a big priority. But the way you rank your list, okay?
I'm just going to walk out.
Because a lot of people
Brady will ask the
Chris
question,
Jones, and they say he's the best player if you just looked at flat player.
Value.
Okay. Positional value.
Positional value. It's like a running back being lowered. It's a quarterback being raised. And so when you look at it, you're right. Chris Jones, and I explained that in the top of the article. Chris Jones plays his position better than Kirk Cousins plays his. But Kirk Cousins is more valuable, and that's why he's the #1 free agent. And how much of a priority should it be? It should be a giant priority for them. They should bring him back. They found out last year, despite the quarterback apologist over here, what it's like to play with a bunch of guys who can't play the position, and they learned how life.
What does that even mean?
Well, you defended every single one of them.
No, I said they never should have benched Dobbs. He was give him a spark, give him a chance to win.
Sound the alarm.
What does that have to do with Kirk Cousins?
Because they found out what life was like without Kirk Cousins.
No one's going to disagree with you on that.
But you defended Josh Dobbs the whole
because they
season.
never should have benched him.
Well, he should have been benched, and they all were bad, and now they need to make sure that they get Kirk Cousins back, despite all the apologies he made for the backup quarterbacks.
These are two.
They are separate.
Have you ever heard the term they go, are these two things mutually exclusive? They actually are in this case. Like, them benching Dobbs has nothing to do with the value of Kirk Cousins.
No, but the fact that Dobbs and all the rest of Mullins, all of them played,
I agree with you.
Very good. Shows you the value of Kirk Cousins.
For like 3 or 4 weeks after he had even played a game, was still top 5, top 10 in some passing statistics or those categories. That's how good he was playing last year. Had he finished the season, he probably would have been MVP. That was the track that he was on last year. So, we'll see how he comes back for the torn Achilles. He's no doubt the #1 free agent on the list. And yes, it's a huge priority to sign him back.
Bring him back. You know you have good regular seasons. Then you worry about the postseason because we know what he does in the postseason.
Woo!
I mean, he's #1 on your list, and you're still taking a shot at the guy.
He's got to prove that he can do it in the postseason.
By the way, it took him so long to come around on Kirk Cousins.
No, Kirk Cousins
literally took him 6 years.
He still can't win in the postseason. I mean, that's
he
another.
He won on the road versus the Saints.
It's one game. It's another hurdle he has to prove he can win.
Will he win in the postseason when he's the quarterback of the 49ers next year, Pete?
Is he going to be the quarterback of the 49ers? According to him yesterday, he will be.
I said he should give them a call.
Well, no, you went a little further than that.
Oh, did I?
Yes, you did. Did he go a little further than that?
No, not at all, actually.
Putting the fence.
A little bit.
Hitting the fence.
What did I say, Chris? What did I say?
Say it again.
Okay.
I said if I was a free agent,
But you think the 49ers should listen, too?
Yeah, they should listen to everyone. They called Tom Brady in the offseason. They called Tom Brady for years to be their quarterback. What you do in the front office every single offseason is, how can we make our roster better? How can we go win a Super Bowl? You should look at every single position and say, is there someone out there we can go get that would be an upgrade over the guy we have? If you can get that guy, you do it, because your ultimate goal is to try to win a Super Bowl. So
within reason.
Within reason of what? Well, yeah, there's contractual obligations and so forth. It's not that simple.
Within age.
It's not as simple as the quarterback scales.
No.
But by the quarterback scales, Kirk Cousins, to me, is a better quarterback than Brock Purdy.
He's proven over the course of his career.
By money, age, and everything else, you'd probably lean to Brock Purdy in that situation.
But that's going to change soon. After next year, they've got to pay Brock Purdy.
So you have a quarterback at number 1 because of that position, but then the next 8, all defensive players, Pete, led by Chris Jones, who's probably not going to be tagged because that number is over $30 million for the Chiefs.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these guys will get tagged, so a lot of them are going to get off the market. But Chris Jones, if he's available, is a guy that teams who want pressure from their down players should make a real strong effort to go get. Now, how you construct that contract is interesting because he's not a kid anymore. So I think that'll be interesting to see how he does it. Here's the other thing about Chris Jones. Chris Jones plays in big games and big moments, but he's not one of those guys that's dominant in games that aren't big games. And if you go back and look at this year, he didn't play great in some games, and he didn't play the run well in some games. But that's not why you signed Chris Jones. You signed Chris Jones for what you saw in the Super Bowl. He impacts a defense in a big way. So I think he's going back to the Chiefs. I think he wants to go back to the Chiefs. I think he will go back to the Chiefs.
I hope he goes back to the Chiefs. You know, if they want to continue to try to win Super Bowls and three-peat, do something that we've never seen before, they're going to need a defensive player like Chris Jones. And I think that probably is something that he's thinking about in the back of his mind. Given his age, I'm sure he wants to cash in. He's got rings, all that good stuff. But if he wants to continue to be a part of greatness, his best chance is probably staying in Kansas City. And you wonder what that difference is of how much he'd get offered somewhere else and how much you get paid in Kansas City, and that greater chance of maybe winning a ring there, how much that means to him. I think that's ultimately the biggest decision they've got to make. I think the other interesting thing we've seen, we talk about, we assumed like, hey, they're not going to use the tag because of the price tag on it. We also saw a number of players who signed the tag and then end up restructuring that one-year deal. And some of that was to incentivize those players to come to camp, come for the entirety of the season, all that good stuff. You wonder if there's not some creative things you could do if you found yourself in that situation where you couldn't come to long-term agreement, you do throw the tag on them, then you figure out a way of renegotiating.
But I think the tag has to go to Snead. So I think when you look at it from that standpoint, if you don't get a deal done with either one of them, they'll tag Snead and then take their chances on Chris Jones coming back as a veteran because Snead's younger. He'd get a big contract on the market, a long-term contract. He might be the one that would be more apt to leave.
Where'd you put Snead on this list?
I think he's like 11 or 12.
Okay, in the teens. So no more offensive players in the top 9. But then at 10, you start your run on wide receivers here. You have T. Higgins at 10. You have Evans 12th, Pittman 14th, Ridley 17th. Which one of those guys has the highest ceiling at the wide receiver position?
I think T. Higgins does. I think I mean, look, for the short term, Mike Evans might be every bit as good, but you got to factor in age is starting to become an issue. But I think with the age being what it is, T. Higgins is more valuable than Mike Evans for the long term of the team trying to go get him. So I would lean to T. Higgins. Now again, and we talked about this yesterday, when you're a number 2 wide receiver and suddenly you find yourself being a number 1, it's a big difference. And can you adjust to that? Can you handle being the number 1 wide receiver? And Brady, you know, you start getting the coverage rolling your way, it's a different animal for a wide receiver. I think he can. I think he's the number 1 wide receiver on the board.
You're also asked to do a lot more within the offense. You know, as a number 1 wide receiver, you're going to be moved around. You're not going to stay stationary because of defense's ability to take you away, whether they play that roll coverage to you or even try to travel a guy with you. You know, sometimes coordinators will try to help you out. They'll put you in the slot. They'll push you in motion. So you have to run a greater variety of routes. Not all wide receivers are able to handle that adjustment really well. I think T. Higgins can. I think he's a number 1 wide receiver. I don't think he's going to be leaving Cincinnati, though. I think they find a way of keeping him, probably under the franchise tag. But as you look through the rest of the list, I mean, Mike Evans has been as productive as anyone. I mean, again, Hall of Fame career up to this point, probably statistically speaking. He's got the ring. How much does he value that? We talked about that with Chris Jones. What's interesting to me about this list as we go on down is he's got Baker Mayfield 1 spot behind Mike Evans. I would think from a positional value standpoint, a guy who's coming off the best year of his career, still at, 28 years old, his best football ahead of him, you would have given Baker Mayfield the nod ahead of Mike Evans, given the positional value.
If there was more body of work, I would have. I mean, it's the 1 year. I mean, let's be
great year in Cleveland,
first
his
year.
rookie year was pretty darn good, too.
Yeah, he had a couple
touchdown
good years in Cleveland. But again, I want to see more out of him. And I love Baker. I think Baker, if I'm the Bucs, I make sure I bring Baker back. I think he's my quarterback. I think they will. But yeah, I see from a positional standpoint, I can see where you could make a case for Baker being the number 2 guy on this list, too. Because he's a quarterback who starts and played well last year.
It's crazy to me, too. We have 2 quarterbacks who are facing potential free agency. And in the case of Cousins, he can't be tagged, so it's a little different. But when you look at it from that standpoint, like we used to say, well, there's no chance he's signing back. Like these guys are going to hit free agency. They're going to cash in. And in both these cases, we'd say the top 2 quarterbacks that are going to be free agents were like, no, they probably should sign back, you know, continue to build build on what they've done so far in Minnesota for Cousins and with Mayfield and Tampa.
Well, when we talked to Baker, he talked about how comfortable he was in Tampa and how he finally felt like it was a team that he could be comfortable with, and that's important. You talk about it all the time, how important that is to a quarterback. They will have a new offensive coordinator in Liam Cohn, but he had some input on that as well.
Yeah, and that's a huge piece to it. As a quarterback, look, you're going to different places, trying to familiarize with the guys you're throwing to, which is difficult enough, but then it's speaking a different language. And I know that sounds like I'm simplifying it, and I am to some degree, but when you're talking about getting that ball out of your hand under 3 seconds, limiting all the different new things you've got to learn every single year is a huge piece of helping you excel. So you would understand why you'd want to stay put.
And Pete, inside the top 30, you have some young O-linemen, including Andre James, 26, a lot of good football in front of him. Where do you value him, and where do you think what teams are a good fit in your opinion?
A lot of starting experience for Andre James. And look, when we evaluate the center position and the way it's played nowadays, most guys, when they have a big power player on them, they're going to have trouble with him, and he does too. I mean, if you watch his tape, if some big power player is on him, he's going to have problems with him. But he's really good in pass protection, and he's improved in the run game, which to me, I think if you can get a well-rounded center to come in and be your starting center, that's a big part of what your offensive line does, and he's smart, he knows how to make the calls. I think he's a free agent out there that somebody's going to get a good young player who's going to be a starter for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, again, it's interesting as we talk about positional value of the quarterback position, you now start to look at how Pete then ranks other position groups. Center, guard, not valued typically quite as much as tackles. I mean, nowadays, though, with as many good defensive tackles as we've seen, Chris Jones, Justin Madubuike, all these other guys we talk about, you've got to have a solid offensive five. Every single guy up front's got to be solid. James will be one of the top, free agents who signed, in particular as an interior offensive lineman or center. But you still got some edge players that I'm kind of surprised are still that far back. I mean, we saw Chase Young on that list. I thought he was a little high compared to where I thought you were going to end up having ranked, because he didn't have the best season the way he finished in San Francisco.
Pete, you've got 3 teams tied for the most free agents in your top 100. You've got the Ravens, the Titans, the Colts, all in the AFC, all have 6. Of those teams, when you look at the cap, when you look at how things are structured, the win-now mentality, obviously the Ravens have, which team is in the most difficult spot with those free agents?
Well, I think the Ravens are. I think if you look at Madubuike being #1, what do you do with him? I mean, you have to find a way to keep him. I think Queen has been a big part of what they do. Clowney had a great year last year.
Stone had a great year.
Zeitler will probably come back as a veteran. He's up 33. I think they'll find a way to bring him back. Stone had a big-time year last year, as 7 interceptions, and then Beckham, who will be a year removed, by the way, from his ACL. Another year removed. That's important. Yeah, another year removed from that ACL.
He's getting up there in age.
Yeah, well, he could still be a third receiver. I mean, he's not a number 2. He's a 3. And so I think the Ravens face some real problems. The Titans have a ton of cap room. I mean, if they want to bring back a lot of their guys, they can. They're more than capable of doing that. But remember, it's a new coach, a new offense, a bunch of new stuff. So I think, new defensive coordinator, they're going to have to obviously make some changes.
And presumably, in both the case of Tennessee and Indianapolis, quarterbacks who are on the rookie deal. Will Levis in Tennessee, and then obviously looking at Anthony Richardson coming back for the Colts. So you've got a little more room to try to get some of those guys back with those free agents.
Now, if you go through this list, Murphy Bunting played really well. The linebacker played well, but you can get rid of the rest of them and have no real problem. Tannehill, go out the door. You don't need him. So Henry, if you want to replace him, that's easy to replace. You get a young running back.
My concern is for Indianapolis, though. When you look at some of the pieces, I mean, Pittman's been incredibly productive for them. He's high on your list. Blackman had a great year. Their defense stood out at times, and so you got to figure out a way of bringing them back. And look, say what you want. As athletic and mobile as Anthony Richardson is, you better have that insurance policy. You better have a backup and go in there and win you some football games like a Gardner Minshew.
Who is 100
and
on your list.
I did that for Brady Quinn because I know he's a big Gardner Minshew
So you
guy.
wouldn't have put him in?
No, I would have put him in. Here's why.
Should be higher, positional value.
He's not in as a starter. He's in as a really good backup. And you mentioned it. If you're Indianapolis and you have a quarterback who's been hurt, and he's been hurt a couple times, if you have that, bring him back. Make sure if he goes down again, you have that insurance policy. I'm with you. I just don't think he's a starter in the league for the long run. I don't think somebody can go out and sign him and say, hey, we're going to go win a Super Bowl with Gardner Minshew. You can win games with him. The inconsistency is maddening with that guy.
By the way, next year we're going to make you memorize the top 100 as well, because Snead is like 6th.
Yeah, I forget. I
Come on, Pete. Pete told the Pick Six guys to basically get lost in the offseason.
No,
but
I
it's
didn't.
a good thing Brady's here. He just recorded a brand new Pick Six podcast.
That's right.
Check
Riveting, I
it
bet.
In
out.
fact, I almost missed this show for the Pick Six podcast.
Why was
Brinson
that?
had you going long.
He was a little long-winded, was he?
Welcome back to CBS Sports HQ. Pete Prisco dropping his top 100 NFL free agents. 8 of the top 10 are defensive players. And right now you're taking a look at the top 10 free agent edge rushers. Number 1 from the Jacksonville Jags, Josh Allen. Danielle Hunter coming in at number 2. Brian Burns rounding out the top 3. So let's talk about number 3 overall on the list. Number 1 when it comes to those edge rushers, Josh Allen. We have to ask the mayor of Jacksonville, of course. And we talked about this. Trent Baalke saying he's going to be a Jag. Obviously, they still have to figure out what they're doing with Calvin Ridley. That's a whole other situation. But is he going to get the tag, Pete?
Yes, he will get the tag. If they don't work out a deal, and they haven't had many conversations so far, I do think he gets the tag, and it's a smart thing to do. You can't allow him to get out the building. Pass rushers are so valuable nowadays. They have a new defensive coordinator, Ryan Nielsen, came from being a defensive line coach. That's where he made his bones. They're going to want to get after the quarterback. He stays, they tag him.
He's going to get the tag. I wouldn't be shocked, though, if they don't try to press the issue of working out some sort of, long-term deal once the summertime comes and the deadline comes a little bit closer. I mean, again, I said this to you yesterday. Trevor Lawrence is going to be up, too. You have to make a decision on him. There's only so many foundational pieces you can keep. Josh Allen's the one on defense. Trevor Lawrence is the one on offense. The timing of this matters. He'll get tagged initially. I think they'll work something out by summertime to get him paid.
Remember, he didn't show up last year. He wasn't happy about it. Didn't show up and had his best season. So much for off-season work with the team, right? He didn't need to be there.
And Pete, what was it we were talking about yesterday on their radio? You were like kind of doubting him, saying he wasn't a game wrecker?
I said
You did before the season.
I said before the season they didn't have a game wrecker. And he responded by being a game
A lot
wrecker.
of guys proved you wrong last
No,
season.
they proved me wrong. I motivate him.
Yeah, that's not just
He owes me a piece of whatever contract he gets. How about that?
Sure, he
No,
drives
it
around listening
always-
to.
it
He had
always
it
comes
on
back to
his
Pete
phone or
Prisco.
something. He had it on his phone.
Got the alert.
Game
Pete
wrecker.
Prisco
I'm
says
a
you're
game
not a game wrecker. All right, I'm going to wreck the game. Let's go to a guy who's a little bit older. Now, Pete said in your article, CBSSports.com, ideally you want to pay guys who are 26, 27, maybe 28. Danielle Hunter's going to be 30 this upcoming season, but he's coming off one of his best seasons as a pro.
If I'm the Chicago Bears and you're looking for the pass rusher opposite Montez Sweat, go get Danielle Hunter. You have the cap room, you have the money to do it, you weaken a team in your own division, and you give you bookends going after the quarterback. They have some young defensive interior players that they drafted last year that they really like, Dexter from Florida being one of them. I think they have a chance to be really good rushing the passer. Go get him, pay him.
It's crazy, too, when you think about the fact Danielle Hunter came to the league at, 20 years old? 20, 21, somewhere in that ball. I mean, he's been playing in the NFL for a long, long time. Still able to ink another deal before he turns the age of 30. So it's pretty remarkable. I love Pete's plan for it. It makes a ton of sense. Opposite of Montez Sweat. They've got the cap space to do it. They need it. It's a big-time need. So it would make sense, too, to keep him within the division. That'll keep him motivated. I do wonder this. He had a really productive year in Brian Flores' scheme. How much of that came from some of the scheme? A ton of pressure, a ton of sacks off of it. I give him credit, but also there's a lot of different looks where Brian Flores created some of those one-on-one matchups for him to be able to go and win. That's not always the case when you go somewhere else. So I do wonder if he'll be able to sustain that if he jumps ships and goes.
System edge rusher. Heard of system QBs.
I would agree with that. It is an advantage. There's no question about it. But he's been a good pass rusher
for his entire career.
So I don't think that's
he's
an
been
issue.
good for his entire career.
Yes.
But this year at that age, there's sometimes you see him get some free rushes, one-on-one opportunities that were created by Brian Flores.
Danielle Hunter coming off of statistically one of his best seasons. Brian Burns, not the same situation at all, a career low in terms of sacks, but he is turning 26, a little bit younger. Pete, what value do you think he has?
I think you have to go back on him. Last year was a bad season all the way around for that organization, and I think
they were never leading in games.
Right.
Like, think about it. Every team you were playing, they had a lead on you, so they're running the football.
That's what I was going to say.
They didn't have many opportunities.
The quarterback was awful, and the offense was awful, and so they didn't have the lead on teams, so he couldn't tee off on people.
That's what you were going to say?
That's exactly what I was going to say. And it's hard to, and when you're playing from behind, it's tough to rush
So
the
it's
passer.
Bryce Young's fault. His numbers weren't
It's
as good
the
as they
whole
should have been.
organizational fault. They were terrible across the board. Bryce Young was bad too, but they were terrible across the board. I think the team that gets him will be able to turn him loose. He will have a much better season next year wherever he plays.
I agree. I don't think they can let him out the door.
I wouldn't.
You look at one of those foundational pieces. He's that. And I don't know if David Tepper is going to continue to buy into Bryce Young, depending on how this next year goes with Dave Canales. But Brian Burns is one of those players you have to on defense. And I think if their offense being a little more successful, scoring points, having a lead will help him, increase that number. So I think he gets tagged. He's a prime candidate for that if they can't work out a long-term deal. But you can't blame Bryce Young for everyone's problems.
Well, sure you can. It always goes right back to the quarterback.
So David Tepper throwing the drink, getting fined $300,000 on Bryce Young somehow?
Boop. Yeah, they were bad. He was frustrated. Boop.
What
it
is
always
this?
goes right. You point, you go in a circle, and it always comes right back to the quarterback. Always. Always.
We have the quarterback
So when you have a bad day on this show, it's my fault?
Your fault.
Yes.
It always goes to the quarterback. Blame the quarterback.
All right, well, we're talking edge rushers right now who could potentially become free agents if they're not tagged by the team or work out long-term deals. Let's go to another one who could be a tag candidate here with the Houston Texans. Jonathan Grenard says he wants to go back to the Texans. Should they tag him?
Tough one, because you're going to have to worry about a number of pieces who are coming up. Will Anderson Jr. in particular, not anytime soon, but in a couple of years, your cap planning, obviously Stroud as well. A lot of considerations. He had a phenomenal year. He's one that I think you have to give a lot of thought to based on how that defense played this year and I think where they're at, too, in the AFC South, if they truly want to be a contender. But I don't know that they'll end up getting this done, and I think someone's going to get one heck of a pass rusher. I'm actually surprised you had him this low on your list. I thought he'd be a little bit higher given the positional value in the season that he had and his age.
I mean, 22? Pretty high.
I'm saying as an edge rusher, I would say that's really after quarterback. I mean, you look at where you have Josh Allen, some of the other pieces. I thought he'd be more.
Yeah, I mean, he's not as good as those players. I mean,
he had a pretty darn productive season.
He had a good year, but I think best football's in front of him. I don't think the Texans are going to tag him. I just don't. I don't think they will. I think he's going to go test the market and see what's out there, and somebody's going to get themselves a really good young pass rusher.
Keeping on going down the list, number 27, Chase Young. Short time with the Niners, got traded to the Commanders at the deadline there. Based on what you saw in the Super Bowl and his short time with San Francisco, how much value does he have in your opinion?
He was bad in the playoffs, and he was better in the Super Bowl. So it's hard to put it. He was much better in the Super Bowl.
He didn't have a great season.
No, he didn't. He only had 4 sacks. I mean, and when he got to San Francisco, that's concerning. Didn't show up in the postseason, but was better in the Super Bowl. He had some plays in the Super Bowl. He played better than he did in the 2 playoff games. So I do think there's potential there. But you're right. Coming off that injury, he hadn't been the same player. What kind of contract do you get? Does he get a 1-year deal? Does he do like Clowney and go somewhere for a year and try and prove himself again and then maybe get another contract?
The interesting thing is you have Jadeveon Clowney behind him. Clowney had a better year, statistically
He's not a better player, though.
And you can say that, but the problem is we're not seeing the same Chase Young we saw before the injury. I think that's the tough part. And on top of it, if you look at any edge rusher in a position to be able to get sacks, get pressure, when you're playing opposite Nick Bosa and Eric Armstead is on the inside, that's a huge help. So
Armstead was bad, though, this year. He was hurt.
It's some part of it, but once you got into the playoffs, like he started to elevate his level of play, too, which happened to coincide, at least in the Super Bowl, too, with Chase Young playing a little better. So I'm just saying it's a little easier to find that production in one-on-ones when you're opposite of a guy like Nick Bosa in particular. We didn't see him play quite as well. It's a new scheme. Maybe that was part of it, but the bottom line is hopefully he can get back to the player that he was before the injury because he hasn't looked the same since.
You mentioned Clowney. He comes in at number 32 overall this season for Pete Prisco. Seems like he's been a free agent every single year, and he has. I mean, look back in 2020, Pete, you had him 10th, then dropped him all the way to 43rd. That's kind of when you were saying he was more name than game, couldn't get after the quarterback, but he did that this season.
And you know how he got after the quarterback? He went to the Ravens, and they create a lot of situations for you to get after the quarterback. When we talk about Chase Young, maybe Chase Young could go to the Ravens and rejuvenate his career.
He's a DC kid, so it would make a lot of sense.
That would make sense for them. Sometimes when you're in a situation, I mean, Van Noy was a pass rusher for them this year. They created opportunities for those guys to get to the quarterback. I still don't think he's a put his hand on the ground and go explode by you, win kind of pass rusher. But he was better this year because of the opportunities he was given with the way they created one-on-ones for him and the ability to stun inside and loop and do all that stuff.
He's a really good player. He's proven it time and time again. I have no problem with him signing these 1-year deals. He's betting on himself. Will maximize his value. A lot of people wonder, well, why don't you sign a 2-year deal that has a little more total value of the contract? Because then if you have a really good year, you're really giving the team control, and you can't go out on free agency and shop yourself again. again to be able to maximize your marketability. And they've got that control for that next year. It's a lot of times players would rather sign a 1-year deal or like a 3-year deal with at least 2 years of guarantees within it to have a little bit more security, especially a player at Jadeveon Clowney's age and given his injuries. But he's been playing at a really high level, and someone's going to get a heck of a pass rusher.
He should go back. He should go back.
Well, yeah, if Baltimore has him back.
Yeah, if Baltimore wants him back, he should go back.
All right, Pete, Brady, we appreciate it. Running down Pete's top 100 free agents, starting with Kirk Cousins all the way to Pete's favorite, Gardner Minshew, at number 100. Just a reminder, you can find that full list over at CBSSports.com. And looking at some important dates for the NFL offseason, of course, the franchise tag window that is open. Free agency gets underway on March 11th, and the draft out of Detroit, April 25th through the 27th.